All right, welcome back to my visual podcast, Tales of Adventure. This is already episode number 6. I'm sporting today my brand new custom painted hat from Troy Lee himself. He painted this for me while he was bored in quarantine. But anyway, today's story is the Irish pub to pub tour with Steve Peat. We did that in October 2006, so quite a while ago. The photos and the stories from Victor Lucas. So I'm going to read his story. So you better get comfortable. You might want to get yourself a beer because I have a feeling you might get thirsty. Let's get started. What's the best way to do a trip around Ireland? A pub tour, of course. That was the plan that took Hans Ray and Steve Peat on a week-long tour of 30 Irish pubs with some hardcore bike riding thrown in to clear the hangovers. Ireland is famous for its pubs, and the Irish people certainly have a talent for socializing, drinking, and having the crack, as the saying goes. The center for all these activities is the local pub, and every village in Ireland has at least one or two pubs. In fact, the main street of most Irish towns has a pub every 30 yards, so you don't get thirsty while walking home, I suppose. It seems that some towns started off as just a pub and everything else grew up around it. That's natural evolution at work, you see. Why are there so many pubs in Ireland, you ask? Well, mainly it's down to the weather, which is basically crap most of the time. What else to do when it's freezing cold, it's dark outside and the wind is blowing the rain sideways? Sit in a warm, cozy pub, order a Guinness and have a laugh with whoever you meet. Of course, later on, after several pints of the black stuff, there will probably be heated discussions on politics, religion, sex, drugs, music, and generally solving all the problems of the world. Unfortunately, nobody ever writes anything down, and the solutions are forgotten the next day. This is why the Irish have yet to conquer the world. They are too busy having a good time. So why a trip to Ireland? Hans explains. A few years ago, Petey and myself went on an adventure to Borneo, looking for headhunters. Ever since then, we've been talking about organizing something on home turf. It's taken a while, but finally, this year, it all came together and we planned this pub-to-pub road trip. The trip began when Hans and Steve loaded their camper with bikes and food, energy bars and beer mainly, and set off on the ferry from Wales to Dublin. They had decided that the aim of the trip was to hit as many cool pubs as possible and get at least one good bike ride in along the way. Actually, the riding turned out to be a lot more hardcore than expected, but more on that later. While sitting on a ferry, which was technically the first pub of the trip, they elaborated on their plan with 2 rules. Rule 1. If they went into a pub, they had to have a drink. Rule 2. They would keep track of all the pubs by counting on their fingers and taking a photo outside each one. Pure genius. Unfortunately, if you look carefully at the photos, it seems that pro mountain bikers can't count very well. The number of fingers held up is all wrong for the first few pubs, but after about 10 they did get the hang of it. Anyway, the first day started with a bit of a sightseeing around Dublin, knocking off the next few pubs of the trip. Pub number 2 was the Blue Light, which is a rustic old biker bar in the hills overlooking the city. There are old bike racing photos on the wall, and any kind of biker is always welcome here. Dublin city traffic can be similar to rush hour in New Delhi, so the bikes were brought out for a tour of the city centre and the Guinness Brewery, pub number 3, which is a place for pilgrimage for anyone with passing interest in beer. After some lunch in the Fox Hunter pub, pub number 4, we hit the road to the west for our first off-road bike destination, Croagh Patrick, near Westport. We stayed that night with local rider Gary Davern. Naturally, there were interesting places along the way, so we stopped off in Athlone at the Castle Inn pub number 5 and Sean's Bar, pub number 6, which is in the Guinness Book of World Records as the oldest pub in Ireland. Visitors to Ireland are often surprised by the poor state of the roads. It's not a big country, but it takes an awful long time to get anywhere. When we finally rolled into Westport, we were glad to see the lights were still on in Campbell's Pub, number 7, at the foot of Gros Patrick Mountain. Legend says that St. Patrick hiked up the steep rocky mountain and built a church at the top. Then he banished all the snakes from Ireland and converted the pagan people to Christianity. Well, he certainly was busy that day. Thousands of people still follow in his footsteps every year, believing that the pilgrimage will cleanse their souls. Some even do it barefoot. Steve and Hans must have looked like some sort of pilgrims emerging through the mist, carrying bikes on their shoulders as they scrambled over the loose boulders that lined the trail. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Visibility was so bad that it was hard to tell if we were getting close to the top, until the little church appeared out of the cloud on the summit. We sheltered for a while from the wind, wondering what the view might be like without the mist, before starting our descent. With visibility down to about 30 feet, the first few minutes of riding the world's longest rock garden was treacherous to say the least. But the bicycle pilgrims were rewarded for their efforts when the mist suddenly lifted to reveal stunning views of the trail as it snaked down the mountain, reaching almost as far as the Atlantic Ocean. The slow, tedious 2-hour climb turned into a flat-out, white-knuckle descent. Boulders the size of footballs rattled under their wheels, and Steve and Hans charged elbow to elbow down the trail. When the trail flattened out, the rocks grew into large slabs and boulders, and there were some extremely technical sections that tested the ability of both Steve and Hans. Each rider tackled these in their own way. Hans negotiated the gaps and drops with finely timed trials moves, balancing in slow motion to pick an accurate line. Steve attacked with more speed, using momentum to carve a smooth line where only jagged rocks existed, jumping over sections where there was nowhere for a wheel to roll. The trail finished conveniently back at Campbell's Pub 8, and after our epic day, it's hard to describe how good the Guinness tasted. Afterwards, Hans said it was more of a mountain than I expected. It was steeper, rockier, and more technical than I thought it would be. It was really alpine. We were only about 700 meters above sea level, but it felt like the higher regions of the Alps or Kilimanjaro. It reminded me of a trail in Livigno, Italy at 3,000 meters. There's a rock field just like the one we rode. Steve said, "Yeah, the last section was really cool. That's what I do when I ride. Pick lines and try to find the fastest way through something." It was really good to have huge rocky parts where Hans could pick a line, do trials through, and I could pick a different line and hit it as fast as possible. When we went for it, we were hitting rocks the size of Labrador dogs or something, just bouncing off them. But you can't brake on that sort of stuff or the rocks will just knock you off. You have to just let off the brakes and pick up a little the front to go light over it. If you go fast, you skim along the top of the rocks. It's like riding over whoops in motocross. If you go slow, you drop into the holes between the rocks. You start hanging up your wheels. It was good to get down though, free of all the sins, and have a Guinness. I think I'll have to go up again tomorrow to get rid of some more sins. Showing our dedication to the pub tour plan, the next day began with breakfast in Tom Sheridan's Pub 9, bacon, eggs and Irish coffee. That's coffee with whiskey, in case you didn't know. A short drive down twisty roads brought us to a castle where we found a short single-track loop that provided some brief entertainment before jumping back on the road to visit the ancient burial tomb called Polna Braun Dolmen. All this sightseeing tourist activity gave us an excuse to open Hans and Petey's mobile pub, Pub number 10, where the house specialty is the beer bong. This harmless-looking contraption fits over a beer bottle and delivers the entire contents to your stomach in about 5 seconds. Yikes. It also makes for some of the loudest belches ever produced by human. Our next riding spot was a huge area of limestone rock called the Burren. This bizarre natural landscape is made up of large, flat stone slabs separated by large cracks with massive boulders randomly scattered around the place. Sort of like giant-sized crazy paving. The rock is beautifully smooth and grippy, but every few meters you have to hop over a bike-swallowing gully or dodge a Volvo-sized boulder. Good practice for rush hour traffic. It's just a massive field of rock, says Steve afterwards. But there are walls separating people's bits of land. To me, it seems weird that anyone would want a piece of land like that. Hans chipped in. It doesn't look very bike-friendly at first, but when we got out there it was actually quite fun. But it's very technical, with constant ruts and cracks. It's interesting landscape, with the 5,000-year-old dolmen graves and the beautiful coastline. The rain started to come in, so it's a good thing we were on some dry pubs at the end of the day. That evening we ended up in the village of Liscannor, which seemed to be a masterpiece of town planning, with 4 excellent pubs almost next door to each other. Our long evening's entertainment began with oysters and Guinness in Vaughan's Anchor Inn 11, followed by deep discussions about something or other in McHugh's 12, then a traditional music session at Egan's, pub number 13, where Petey learned to play the spoons, or was that spooning? We finished up at O'Brien's number 14, which is possibly the smallest and most old-fashioned pub in Ireland. Walking in the door was like going back 50 years. No TV, no fancy food or music system. Just 2 old guys sitting on a wooden bench having a quiet chat about nothing in particular. Tom, the owner, was behind the counter. The uneven wood shelves displayed the drinks, food and groceries that were for sale. A single bare bulb shone overhead. Conversation was slow, quiet and friendly. That night the wind and rain beat hard on the roof of the camper, but I slept like a log, a rather drunk log. The next morning was not a pretty sight. Outside the camper was wind and rain. Inside was more wind, too much Guinness, and some very sore heads. But we had a serious mission planned for today, riding the Cliffs of Moher. A narrow ledge with 600 feet sheer drop to the sea and rocks below. Hans brewed some very strong coffee. The weather was misty and cold and windy as we approached the cliffs. Remembering the previous night's pub stories of dangerous updraft winds pulling people over the edge, we had almost decided that this would be too risky. But amazingly, as we got closer, the wind died to just a whisper, a calm before the storm, we wondered. The waves crashed on rocks below, and my stomach filled with butterflies as I lay beside the cliff's edge, trying to photograph. Steve and Hans rode calmly past and smoothly along the narrow ledge, even hopping over a small gap. With a rock wall to one side and an empty void to the other, there were barely inches to spare. In places, there was less than 6 inches for a wheel to roll along. It would have been simple enough at ground level, but in this position, the consequences of a mistake were about as serious as it gets. Skill, confidence and nerves of steel. I certainly won't be trying this at home. I'm adding a little extra story here from my talk tour. People often ask me about fear. Dealing with fear can be learned. Fear is only a warning reminder from your brain to be careful that your actions could have consequences. Fear is good, acknowledge it, but then put it aside, don't focus on it. Focus on what you want to do, not what you don't want to do, as in falling down the cliff. Focus on the ideal line. Mind over matter. Block everything out and concentrate on the task ahead. But always be aware of the dangers. Be aware of what could happen and have a plan B or even a plan C ready. At the same time, I'm on autopilot and let my instincts, intuition and muscle memory kick in. to make adjustments along the way. In this case, plan B would be, if I have to put my foot down, let's use the left foot, not the right foot. I was almost relieved, says Victor, to leave the ledge as we continued onto a disused trail along the cliff tops to Hag's Head. The weather was getting worse, and although we could see nothing in the distance, we could sense the huge emptiness beyond the cliff edge. The trail was great to ride, with natural berms, transitions, and ruts, but eventually we were cold and soaked to the skin. We called it a day for riding and celebrated our success with lunch at a tourist restaurant. The lasagna was cold and rubbery, and the tea tasted of damp socks. We should have known better than to stop anywhere other than a pub. With quite a few miles to go before our next stop, we threw our damp gear into the camper and hit the road. We rattled our way along the twisty roads like a top-heavy roller coaster. A brief stop at Ulrich's Bar 15 was our only break before Killarney. Things were looking up though, as the weather was definitely improving. Another castle stop gave Hans a chance to bring out his hardtail trials bike and show off some of his routes with some classic trials sections. We all knew that the week was going by fast, so that night at Killarney we put the pub tour into overdrive with a quick fire round of The Lawn 16, Mustang Sally's 17, Hannigan's 18, Sheehan's 19 and Jade's 20. Phew. Next morning things got tricky when breakfast at Molly Darcy's, pub number 21, was followed by a stop for Irish coffees at Ladies' View pub 22. Eventually a thick black marker solved the serious problem of only having 20 fingers to count with. For the day ride, we had called in some local help in the shape of Rory O'Keefe, who would show us along the old Kenmare Road that runs for about 15 miles from Kenmare to Killarney. At over 300 years old, the road, not Rory, winds through glens and valleys in some of Ireland's wildest natural landscape. Along the way we passed the remains of some old ruined farmhouses. The reason is a chilling story. They were deserted back in 1840 when the Great Famine struck Ireland. When the potato crop failed for a number of years, over 1 million people died of disease and starvation, while a further 3 million left the country permanently. With half the population gone, many houses and lands around the country were left deserted, and roads like this were closed. It felt as we were riding through a ghost town. The trail was technical and tough, so there wasn't too much time to look at the view, Hans said afterwards. That was a classic hiking trail. I expected a really mellow ride, but it was actually quite a cool single track with a lot of technical challenges. Really slippery, round rocks. For a long way, it was really trialsy and challenging to ride. Steve adds, Hans was good at that stuff. It was fun for me to try and get through there. Impossible to do feet up, but still good. The best way to get over those slippery rocks is to carry your speed. Let the bike slip around a bit, but use your momentum to get through. Just keep going forward. We arrived in Killarney just as the heavens opened. Soaked through, cold and covered in mud, we piled our bikes and filthy riding gear into the back of the camper. It was really starting to smell bad in there. We hit the road, and the Horseshoe Bar, number 23 in Kenmare, provided our post-ride refreshments. With our list of biking spots fully ticked and checked, Rory took us on a whirlwind tour of Cork City. Another epic night out, and I admit I was starting to fade a little. Good thing that Rory had enough staying power to help us pack in another 6 pubs. The Bull McCabe's 24, Anne Bodren 25, the Old Oak 26, the Quad 27, Anne Brock 28, and Ocon Yohobert was number 29. Now it's time to end the trip, we were back in Dublin, sitting in Johnny Fox's pub. There's just one night left before Steve and Hunt get the ferry back home. This is our 30th pub, and it's also Ireland's highest pub. I ask if they have discovered anything about Ireland. Steve replies, "There's a lot of pubs, even more than I thought." Sometimes I couldn't understand what people were saying, so it was good to have some locals to translate. Hans's reply was, "The writing was way better than I expected, perfect for Petey and myself for our combination of writing styles. My main goal for this trip was to write the Cliffs of Moher, and we did that. Petey's goal was to hit 30 pubs, and we did that too. Later that evening, just for the hell of it, we returned to the first pub we stopped at from the ferry, the Blue Light, number 31, to share a few stories from our trip with the locals. There's no TV, no music, no poker machines, and no pool tables. But there's laughing, joking, and everyone is having a good time. It's only been 6 days, but I think Hunt and Steve are getting the hang of the Irish pub scene." Well, cheers to that. This is the end of Victor Lucas's story, who took the photos and guided us through its beautiful country. At this point, I would like to add the aftermath, how the photos from the Cliffs of Moher went viral in the months and years afterwards. These are some of my favorite photos ever, and I wish I could somehow count how many millions of people have seen them. But this was not possible at the time, or by the way they got circulated through various channels. This was one of the few trips we didn't bring a camera crew with us. Instead, Petey brought a little handheld camcorder, which we used sometimes to get bits and pieces. The night before we rode the cliffs, we forgot to charge the battery of the camera. Rookie mistake. That's why we only have a few shots riding the ledge before the camera died. As always, the photos and stories were published in over 25 magazines worldwide. But one morning, a few months afterwards, we received an email telling us that we made the front page of one of Ireland's leading newspapers. They questioned what we were doing, even doubted whether the photos were real, and basically called us irresponsible and crazy. Us? Crazy? Well, and asked even why we bothered with helmets. The following day, every other Irish newspaper and even radio stations picked up the story and interviewed us. At first, the local authorities at the Cliffs of Moher denied the whole event happened. They called the photos fake and photoshopped, and they claimed we had parachutes in our backpacks, etc., etc. Eventually, the photos went viral online. Email chains would go around, the kind of emails your uncle or grandmother would send you. Emails titled "The craziest vacation spots" or "The most dangerous locations on earth," etc., etc. These emails would go around and around in every country, in every language in the world, often not even giving us credit by names. They even popped up as giant billboards in South Africa, and to this day they are posted on huge Instagram accounts like Earth Pics or on Facebook pages, where they get millions of views and thousands of comments and likes. A few years after our trip to Ireland, photos started circulating of a giant piece of rock that broke off the ledge and fell into the rocks and ocean 200 meters below, making it now unpassable, and a major section was missing forever. They probably blame us for that as well. Well, that's it, folks. Please don't drink and ride or drive. Always drink responsibly. Please watch the short and grainy film from this trip on my YouTube channel. And don't forget to watch some of my previous visual podcasts, and stay tuned for the new ones to come. Cheers, my friends.